I never want to see good policy be ruined by bad behavior. And when you have good policy, and Americans by and large support deportations, they support this immigration policy, they overwhelmingly voted for President Trump because of this particular issue. But when you have a little bit of what I would argue was some bad behavior kind of happening, leading to that unraveling on both sides, by the way, then you actually erode good policy. This is good policy. Enforcing our laws is good policy. It's great for Americans, is what we should be doing.
Welcome back to a brand new edition of Problematic Women. I'm Virginia Allen. We love that you are joining us today on Problematic Women, where it is not wrong to be right. And we are so excited to have Meaghan Mobbs with us today. Meaghan, you have an incredible resume that is long and storied. And you, right now, you are working at the Independent Women's Forum in Washington, D.C. We have so many great friends at IWF and have been privileged to have some of your colleagues on the show over the past several years since the show was founded. But you're the director of their Center for American Safety and Security. You also are a small business owner. You have a doctorate in clinical psychology. I must say, though, out of your long storied resume, the thing that caught my attention the most is that you served in the Army as an Army officer, and you were a paratrooper. And I was like, okay, we got to start there. So let's start there. How did you get into that field, obviously, of work, of deciding I'm going to serve my country in this way, and then ultimately becoming a paratrooper?
So I will always say it's a family business. So both of my parents were active duty. My mom was one of the first women to go to airborne school. So I always say I stand on the shoulder of the women that went before us that were giants in this space. But my dad was in the Pentagon on 9/11, and I was in high school. And I thought that I wanted to serve. I didn't really know what that looked like. I was in 10th grade, and that happened. And that day changed everything for me. And initially, I told my parents I wanted to, graduate from high school. I wanted to enlist and actually wanted to be a combat medic. Both of my parents said, if you want to do the route to go into the Army, we want you to look at the premier institution for making Army officers. Both my parents did ROTC. They said, look at West Point. And so I did a week up there where they had a summer program. Fell in love with it. I absolutely fell in love with West Point, and I decided if I was going to go that route that I wanted to go to West Point, and then I wanted to join, I wanted to be like my parents. I wanted to be a paratrooper. So went to West Point, picked Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is the home of the airborne in America, and that's how it all happened.
And how long were you a paratrooper?
So 5 years. I was in for 5 years before getting out. Yeah.
I mean, I have to imagine that there were moments where it was probably like, whoa, how did I get here? And moments where like, this is the best job in the entire world. How am I getting to do this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think if anytime anyone's ever like, I'm not afraid of jumping out of a plane, is the day they should stop jumping out of planes, because it's always a little bit frightening. You should always have like a little bit something in your stomach like, whoo, this is unnatural to be leaping out. But when I was in airborne school, I was one of the few women that were in what we call our sticks, which is like your kind of group of paratroopers. And I think I was like further back in the line. I was maybe like 9th or 10th from the paratroop door, which is where you exit the aircraft. So it was our first jump at airborne school. I was the only woman in the stick. And the black hat, which is the instructors, came to the back, pulled me out of the line and brought me to the front so that I would be first out the door. Wow. Puts me in the door and then leans over and yells in my ear. He says, but if you go out first, there's no way the men won't jump. Wow. And so that was the first time that I jumped out of a plane. And he was right. None of the men refused after I went out first.
How many jumps did you do?
Oh, gosh. So when I was in the 82nd, I did, I can't even remember now, in the 20s. It's not a huge number. Okay. But then I was also a civilian skydiver. So I then skydived. I have about over 30 skydives.
Oh, my gosh. You can't get enough of it.
Well, I can now. Now I'm a mom with 2 girls. Okay. And so now I'm like, I like it back on the ground.
Yeah, fair. Very, very fair. Well, obviously, your service, thank you for your service to our country. And I
love our country.
Well, I mean, it's incredible just to look at both your storied career, but really you're continuing in so many ways to support not only our military, but our law enforcement through the work you're doing now at IWF and in so many other capacities, your volunteer work with our veterans, our service members. You have been so vocal in support of our law enforcement, especially recently. in looking at ICE and your support of what is going on in Minneapolis, of Tom Homan. You had a great tweet out the other day saying like, your #1 Tom Homan fan club. So I want to take some time to get into that because it's an issue that we can't get away from right now. Right. And so we're going to do a quick, like, okay, how do we get here? Let's look back at the last 6 weeks. So beginning of January, we saw the Trump administration choose to send about, by the end of January, about 3,000 agents into Minneapolis to launch a surge there, specifically targeting criminal illegal aliens. But Border Czar Tom Homan has been very clear, no one is off the table. If you're in the country illegally and we discover that you are, you will be deported. So there's this surge. Almost instantly, we see that there are anti-ICE, anti-immigration enforcement protests that start breaking out in Minneapolis. That leads ultimately to Renee Good's death. She is shot and killed, and then to Pretti's death. So, and then from that, protests increase again. We see the Trump administration say, we're going to choose to deploy Tom Homan to Minneapolis to kind of handle this situation. And we just saw Tom Homan make an announcement this week on some of the changes. The biggest thing that Tom has really stressed when he landed in Minneapolis is there need to be conversations, and if we can get real cooperation on the ground with all law enforcement working together, state, local, and federal, then we can get to what the left is demanding, which is a pare down. I mean, really, the left is demanding that ICE leave entirely. And of course, they're not going to do that because they have permanent offices in the city. So there will always be a presence of ICE in Minneapolis. But to get down to a real reduction, Tom is saying we need to have cooperation. So we got an update from Homan this week. And let's go ahead and roll that clip because I think it's important to see where we've come from and where Tom is saying we're headed.
Given this increase in unprecedented collaboration, and as a result of the need for less law enforcement officers to do this work in a safer environment, I have announced effective immediately we will draw down 700 people effective today. 700 law enforcement personnel.
Tom Homan is saying we have this cooperation, and that really centers around this issue of ICE detainers. So when there's a criminal illegal alien, they've been arrested for a crime within the state, within a county in Minnesota, ICE will often say, hey, when their time is up in that county or state jail or prison, we would like to take them into federal custody. That's referred to as a detainer. You know all this, but just background.
Important for everyone else to know.
Of course. So because Minnesota is a sanctuary state, those detainers are not always fully honored.
Correct.
And so Homan is saying, okay, we need that cooperation. He's saying we're getting enough cooperation now that we can reduce this force by 700 agents. Some people are saying, okay, is this a retreat? Is this a surrender? Homan's saying, no, it's not a retreat. It's not a surrender. This is a result of cooperation. What is your take? Is Homan right that this is not a compromise in any way?
So I think he's right in the sense, well, first off, again, huge Tom Homan fan. I think he's fantastic. I think it was the best decision by President Trump to deploy him to Minnesota.
Absolutely.
Like we're clearly seeing the impact and the results of of what's happening. So I want to lead with that.
Absolutely.
And I think that both things can be true. I think that this is certainly not a retreat because we were seeing cooperation, which is what we've asked for, what the federal government asked for from the beginning. And that was the major issue, is just cooperate with us, and then we won't have to have this large presence. The lack of willingness to cooperate is why you even saw this surge kind of to begin with. Yeah. So the fact that that cooperation is happening now is actually a major win. And quite frankly, it's a major win for Minnesotans. It's a major win for the local communities. I think that we can all, and the president has spoken about this, like what happened to Renee Good and to Alex Pretti is tragic. And I think we can acknowledge that we never want Americans to die. That's a terrible thing. And we have to enforce our laws. And so Tom Homan coming in, it kind of really, I would say, making an effort to build those bridges across law enforcement from local, state, and federal levels is why we're seeing now that cooperation. So I think it's not a retreat. I actually think it's an optimization of policy.
Yeah, well, I was fascinated. This week I had a conversation with a gentleman who heads the Sheriff's Association in Minnesota, Mr. Stewart, and kind of asked him that. question of like, okay, what exactly has changed? Because Homan is saying we've had enough cooperation, but it was a little unclear. And he was like, nothing's been signed. It's not like there's been policy change. The main thing that's changed is communication.
Yep,
that
absolutely.
now the two sides are talking to each other. And by very nature, that means, okay, maybe just policies that people weren't clear on, or just in general, that cooperation naturally increases when people are having conversations, which is huge.
So communication leads to cooperation, right?
Yeah.
So you don't
One
have to
begets
have
the
a
other.
signed document in order for that to be the case, because by and large, local and state authorities should be working with federal authorities. And I think the great tragedy of all of this is that I do not think the deaths of Renee Good or Alex Pretti would have happened if that cooperation had occurred from the beginning. And it was the kind of flame-throwing rhetoric, spinning up of all of this, of an invasion of ICE into Minnesota, that led to this kind of like fomenting of anger and rage. And I think that's what makes me upset, is these deaths just didn't need to happen. So I am very pleased to see a little bit of a level setting happening, that rhetoric being toned down, because I never want to see good policy be ruined by bad behavior. And when you have good policy, and Americans by and large support deportations, they support this immigration policy, they overwhelmingly voted for President Trump because of this particular issue. But when you have a little bit of what I would argue was some bad behavior kind of happening, leading to that unraveling on both sides, by the way, then you actually erode good policy. This is good policy. Enforcing our laws is good policy. It's great for Americans, is what we should be doing. So anyway, it makes me glad to see what's happening, but also just sad that what had to happen first.
Well, and I think that gets to the heart of, is this really a PR battle at the end of the day? Like, is that
interesting.
the first line of defense, really, is your messaging around it? Because if, like you said, there had been that cooperation and communication from the onset, maybe Alex Pretti and Renee Good would still be alive. So
I think you're right.
PR better?
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting way to frame it. But I don't think you're wrong. I do think so much of what good policy gets bolstered by good communications. Good communications is inherently effective messaging. And so, I think some of this was just the way that it was messaged. But then also just, let's be honest, Minnesota, Governor Walz did not want to see President Trump be successful. Of course, the mayor of Minneapolis didn't want to see President Trump be successful. And so they inherently were going to create unnecessary tension around all of this. And I think the great tragedy here is that it is Minnesotans suffering because of that tension. So even if we message the best all the time, there's still going to be reluctance or resistance because it's just, quite frankly, President Trump. But I do think...
and I think that's critical, too, just to mention that... And I don't know if it's possible, maybe it's possible at this point to move past that, but... Trump derangement syndrome is real, and there are people that no matter what, even if it's an amazing policy that in reality they support, just because Trump's stamp is on it, they're going to say, oh no, I oppose that. Yeah. Which is sad. It's sad that we're at that point, and I'm like, I don't know, like, is there a way to reverse that? I'm not very optimistic that there is.
I'm not. For those that have like gone full that direction, it's like impossible sometimes to break through. And I'm sure there's a whole, and my background, you said clinical psychology. I'm sure there's like this whole like psychological process that happens. But I do find it quite sad, because this goes back to, again, the president didn't even really have an opportunity to fully embrace the fact that not only did he win the Electoral College, he won the popular vote. There was a substantial amount of support for his policies, in particular around this issue. Border security and immigration were a huge election issue. But there are those that, again, no matter how good he was to do, they would just still find something to be negative about. Now, that being said, I do think Tom Homan represents a good shift in messaging, and we are seeing the result of that. So messaging does matter.
It does. Well, and Trump did a little bit of his own messaging this week on this issue.
Well, Trump loves doing his own messaging, let's be honest.
That's actually true. He is his best messenger. Let's go ahead and roll the clip from Trump. This is an interview the president did earlier this week, just sharing, he was asked, what did you learn from the situation in Minnesota? And I found his response to be pretty interesting.
So, Mr. President, speaking of Minneapolis, what did you learn?
I learned that maybe we can use a little bit of a softer touch, but you still have to be tough. These are criminals. We're dealing with really hard criminals.
Okay, so not at all a change in policy from the president, still saying we got to be hard, we got to be firm. But that's a pretty rare moment, honestly, for Trump to say, yeah, maybe we could have done that a little differently, at least on the onset.
Well, it makes me think of the phrase an iron fist with a velvet glove. There are some times that you have to be a little bit, I would say, softer in messaging or the way that you approach these things, because these are emotional. These are they can be very inflammatory. And again, but it's good policy. And so in particular, when you have something that has the opportunity to potentially be a major battle like we saw, literally and metaphorically, being smart and strategic in how you're communicating and executing is extremely important. So I think the president obviously clearly recognizes it in his own words. And that's why I credit him greatly for saying that Tom Homan is going to go take point.
Yeah. Well, and Homan has said, I'm going to be out there. I'm not going to leave until we're done here, really. And I found it interesting that everyone wants to know, because this is obviously so much forefront in the news. Everyone wants to know, what is the American public thinking about this issue on average? And we have seen some conflicting polls on this issue, which polling data, there's a level where it's helpful. And then there's another where you always have to kind of take it with a grain of salt, because I think even in polling, there can be an agenda. And in the way questions are worded, there's an agenda. So there's 2 polls that recently came out that I would say have a pretty similar general objective behind them, trying to understand how the American people are currently thinking and feeling about immigration. The polls got 2 different very results, I would say, based on the wording of questions. So I want to start with polling from Cygnal, spelled with CY. So they recently did a poll that asked Americans, do you support or oppose deporting those illegally in the U.S. back to their country of origin? 61%, so 61 out of every 100 U.S. voters said yes, they support deporting illegal aliens back to their home country. And I was fascinated that it doesn't even say criminal illegal alien. It's just you're in the country illegally. Okay, now look at an NPR Marist poll, NPR PBS/Marist poll that came out this week that asked the question, how would you describe the actions of ICE in enforcing immigration law? 65% say they've gone too far. So you have, on the one hand, you have 65% of Americans saying ICE has gone too far. You have 61% of Americans saying we need to deport those who are in the country illegally. And that Cygnal poll went even further. 73% of Americans agree that coming into the U.S. illegally is breaking the law. 58% oppose defunding ICE, and 54% support ICE enforcing our immigration laws. So it's like, okay, Americans still want immigration laws enforced. They still want our borders secure. They still want those who come in the country and are in the country illegally deported. And there also have this group of Americans, 65%, who are saying ICE has gone too far. How do you kind of square those things?
I think it's because of what we were seeing, quite frankly, what we were seeing coming out of Minneapolis, right? Because I think in general, Americans by and large are very supportive of law enforcement. Let's be very clear. Oftentimes the polls demonstrate that very clearly. And the things that were unfolding in Minneapolis, again, and it's a confluence of events, and I don't want to necessarily ascribe any type of direct blame to ICE, because I think there was all of these cascading events, and obviously I think there's going to be some investigations around, in particular, the killing of Alex Pretti, which I think is important. But I think what those 2 polls are actually doing are talking about policy, and they're talking about the execution of policy. So Americans support the policy, which is deportation. But like President Trump said, perhaps there's a way to go about it that's not exactly how it unfolded in Minneapolis. And I think that's the threading of the needle where he said, we're going to keep doing it, but maybe with a softer touch, which I do think means increasing communication with local and state authorities. I think it means messaging it more effectively. I also think it means doing what the administration seems to be doing, which is being transparent when something happens and saying, all right, we're going to fix this now. Because that's exactly what the president did. He recognized something happened, in particular with Alex Pretti, and then moved rapidly to fix it. And then just quite frankly, I think social media has amplified some of the worst possible moments. I think our adversaries, Russia, China, Iran, are loving this moment. They are amplifying it everywhere. They are making sure everyone sees it in order to begin to sow this discontent. And so I think that's another aspect that people aren't talking about is how much this is being utilized to divide Americans.
Yeah. Well, that has been fascinating. And I credit my colleague Tyler O'Neill at the Daily Signal with doing some great investigative work on this, because it is frightening when you begin to recognize, oh, these aren't just organic protests. It's not just people that are frustrated and, made a homemade sign and walked out on the street to protest ICE. There's a concerted and organized effort And I think over time, we're going to learn more and more and more how deep some of these roots go and just how organized and some of the groups that, these sort of fronts are tied to. And, it's not just people that are frustrated and out there. In the same way that we saw with Antifa, there's a bigger mission that these groups have.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they absolutely want to destroy us from within. And you're exactly right about coordination. I think it's very frightening, actually, these manuals that were distributed. And in them, they even had like report types or something called a salute report in the military. It's an acronym, SALUTE. It stands for like size, activity, location, unit. It's actually to identify, the salute report is used by our military to identify enemy activity. So you're using now this acronym, you're circulating in civilians to report on law enforcement enemy activity. What a dangerous juxtaposition to have Americans utilizing a report meant for our enemies, but for our own law enforcement. And so I do think increasingly we're going to see that this was orchestrated and fomented by, I think, some very bad actors. I think clearly there's been money involved in order to allow this to happen. And then just quite frankly, I think that there are many groups and adversaries who are very good at weaponizing even marginal divides between Americans and exploiting them to the best of their ability. And they do that using social media sometimes.
Yeah. You mentioned Russia, China. Why would Russia and China care to get involved? Why would they want to stir up these protests?
Because a destabilized America is great for them, right? Because they can show that the West is failing. Democracy failed. This is why we shouldn't have that. This is all bad. See how the West can't even, in a couple of different directions, can't even enforce their laws, or they're overhanded. That's why they're not really a democracy. There's so many different avenues of messaging that they can use, because what they want is a fractured America. They want Americans seeing the other side as the enemy. They want us to be angry at each other. They want us to be constantly at each other's throats. It's beneficial for them, because if we can't unify around some very basic things like law and order, then how are we ever going to muster the willpower to counter them?
Yeah.
We're not. So this is just fodder for them.
Yeah. I was interested. I had a conversation it was about a week ago with Laura Reese, who heads the Border and Immigration Center at the Heritage Foundation. And she was saying, look, you look across America, ICE enforcement is happening in every single major city across the United States. And yet we're only hearing about Minneapolis. Why is that? Because that's where the organized and focused opposition protests are. That's where the left wants their focus to be. That's where, they kind of put all their chips in that basket. And you see the repercussions of that and the results and the fallout. And yet it's like, okay, we're not talking about all of these other cities where ICE is doing excellent work. They're going in, they're doing their job quietly. And that has even, I think, begged some questions around like, okay, should ICE operate a little bit more quietly? And I talked to some folks, called some sources and kind of begged that or posed that question to them of, do you think ICE needs to just be quieter in the way that they're going about doing things? And they said, maybe, but really at the end of the day, it's about these leftist groups, and they're the heart of the issue here. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you present it. Because it doesn't actually have to do with the work, like we've talked about. It has to do with undermining American values.
Exactly. And I think this is where you mentioned earlier, I think it's something like Texas is responsible for 22% of ICE arrests. Wow. Minnesota is responsible for 2.2%. And yet, of course, we're not talking about Texas because by and large, local and state authorities have been remarkable in their cooperation. And because we're not seeing this fomenting and this kind of enrage from the left in Texas. And by the way, it's not to say that there aren't lots of Democrats in Texas. There actually are some huge pockets of that in Texas. But we're not seeing that for a variety of reasons. And I think you're exactly right. I think what the organized left is very good about is recognizing where a flashpoint is going to be and then putting all their chips in that basket and exploiting it to the best of their ability. Yeah. And I travel overseas a lot. I have people overseas who are never really involved in American domestic politics being like, what is happening in American cities? And I'm like, no, one city. Let's be clear, one city. And like, that's one city out of all of these major cities where ICE operations are happening. Yeah. So I do think, to your point, it's right. They put all their chips in that basket. And again, they are successful in the sense that they have captured the messaging cycle, because to your point, we're talking about this. We're talking about this nonstop. And so they're very good at doing that.
Yeah, they are. Well, IWF, Independent Women's Forum, you all have been looking at this issue of immigration more broadly and what it means for the United States, communities across this country, the world. Share, if you would, a little bit about y'all's findings in this new report.
So we're talking about the report we released called Women in the West, which I encourage everyone to go read. First off, it's an amazing report that looks at a variety of our Western values, why they're so critically important. But we look at immigration as an indicator of what we call, so Gad Saad, who is a very brilliant academic, coined a term suicidal empathy. And so we use this framework, and it's the idea that you're making decisions that seem on the surface compassionate, but are so unmoored from kind of reason and logic that you're actually in some ways committing civilizational suicide. And unfettered immigration, open borders are a perfect example of that because they don't serve anyone. They certainly don't serve the country in which it has the open border. It erodes sovereignty, territorial integrity, values, all sorts of things. It's also dangerous for the people that are trying to illegally immigrate. And so the report talks about not just here in America, but in Europe where this has happened as well, and how dangerous that is for nationalism, for having core values, what it means in order to assimilate them into society, and then also what happens when you do have at times cultures that are in conflict with one another. And that moral relativism is very dangerous. It is okay to say that a country that abuses women by forcing them to veil or engages in female genital mutilation, that those values are incompatible with our Western values. And it's okay to say, no, they don't belong here. And so this report talks about that a whole lot. And I will say at IWF, we are very pro-border security, so very pro-closed borders, and very open legal immigration, because we still do want to be that shining light. But what was happening previously was not that. And so this report looks at those things. It looks at what happens when you have unfettered illegal immigration and what it does to erode civilization, both here in America, but also in Europe, where we need them. We need Europe, and Europe needs us.
Yeah. Well, and as you're speaking, I'm thinking we don't need to be the experiment or the guinea pig because we've watched it play out in Europe.
Yes,
we know how it ends.
Yeah.
We know that you can literally destroy a whole society, a way of life, when you just say anyone can come in. It doesn't matter.
Of course. And I will say, too, we were talking about our adversaries earlier, and Giorgia Meloni, who I'm major girl crush on her. She's amazing. But she also talks very openly about how Russia has purposefully forced migration in Africa into Italy to destabilize Italian values. So our adversaries are also using things like open border policies under the previous administration to use a football term, flood the zone in order to allow people to come in. We talk a lot about immigration from Latin America and the kind of countries that do. There's a lot that come through. But one of the things we don't talk a lot about is how many Chinese nationals came across the open border. And we just saw this report a couple of days ago about this biolab in Las Vegas. A huge number of Chinese nationals, military-age males, crossed through an open border under the previous administration. So this goes back to, there is an effort by our adversaries to weaponize what look like compassionate policies against us.
Yeah. Well, and that word compassion, I think, is the exact word that drove some of those interesting speeches at the Grammys.
Yeah.
To use a nice word.
God, that's a very nice word. That's a very nice word. That's not the word I would
very
use.
Very generous.
Yeah.
And wearing the Ice Out pins. So I'll say you use a football term. So Bad Bunny's doing the halftime show during the Super Bowl this weekend. Turning Point USA, shameless plug. They have a halftime show alternative.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. So
okay.
Turn off Bad Bunny, who does not support our law enforcement and instead support the great work that Turning Point USA is doing, bringing an alternative.
Why is it always like the most privileged, protected? They're the ones that say get rid of things like our law enforcement. Like quite easy for you to say behind like your gated community. It's like always the most privileged that tell us we should be embarrassed about the country that's actually providing them the greatest opportunities in the history of mankind. Yeah. That kind of arrogance just like gets so under my skin.
It's very hypocritical.
To say the least. You're using very nice words.
Well, I think we could have a whole episode just unpacking that element alone. But how can our audience keep up with the amazing work that you're doing at IWF and so many of the other elements that you're involved in, your social platforms?
Well, first off, I mean, I could not talk about independent women more. It's such an incredible group of like brave, strong, beautiful, savvy women who cover all issue areas. I mean, everything from, protecting women's sports all the way to my security issues. So you can find all of us at independentwomen.com. And then I'm on social media with mobs, MOBBS _ mentality. And you can follow my work there, but also just in general, checking out the Center for American Safety and Security, where we talk about all the issues that affect women's safety and security, everything from crime to border security to national security to foreign policy.
I love it. Will you be watching the Super Bowl this weekend?
I will be watching. I will, but now I'm going to not watch the halftime. I'm going to go look at the alternative programming, which I love.
Exactly. Who are you rooting for?
Honestly, I have no idea. Do you have a specific team that you're for?
I'm a Patriots fan, so I will indeed be rooting for the Patriots. And so the last time for those who don't know, Patriots are playing the Seattle Seahawks.
Yes.
And this is
by the way, I don't like either team, which is why I'm like, I'm just going to watch because it's an American tradition. I'm like ambivalent about the outcome.
I'll watch the commercials. This is a rematch from, I believe it was 2016. It was either 2015 or 2016 that the Patriots played the Seahawks, and the Patriots won at the last minute with an interception. And I was in college and watching it with a room full of Seahawks fans, and just like the room went quiet. I tried not to
cheer?
rub it in. I inside, but I was like, I'm not going to rub it in.
You're so kind.
Just took my win. So as a Patriots fan, we're hoping to repeat history, but many people are hoping for a different outcome. So.
Well, who's favored? I honestly.
Usually everyone just roots against the Patriots. They're a team that everyone loves to hate, but we'll see. We haven't been winning quite as much since we lost Tom Brady. So, I think it's time that
who's living his own life right now.
Exactly. That's a whole other story. But Meaghan, thank you. For those who are watching, our question of the week we're going to have on Instagram this week. And that is, do you support the ICE operation in Minneapolis? We want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? But Meaghan, thank you again for joining us. Tell us one more time how we follow you on social.
So at mobs, MOBBS _ mentality, mobs mentality.
Amazing. Well, Meaghan, thank you for your time. And for all of you listening, thank you for joining us. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on brand new shows from Problematic Women. And make sure you're following us on Instagram and the Daily Signal across all social media platforms.